And that was the brunt of SANDF being a trending topic.
Right, those are your trending topics this morning. And of course, talking more about that midterm budget policy statement that was delivered yesterday. Leah?
Indeed. Well, I mean, the news coming out of it was that National Treasury has revised down South Africa's economic growth outlook from 2.1% to 1.9% in 2022. And this, of course, is mainly due to increased global and domestic risks. However, the government says it has been successful in restoring the health of public finances due to disciplined budgeting, supported by high commodity prices and a narrowing budget deficit. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana tabled the midterm budget policy statement yesterday, to which there have been very mixed reactions and reviews. Business Unity South Africa says while there are some noted positives coming out of the midterm budget, they would have expected a clearer and more definitive approach. Well, we've got Business Unity South Africa President Professor Bonang Mohale joining us now to talk about this. Great to have you. Thanks so much for being with us so nice and bright and early.
Joanne, thank you so much for having me, my dear sister.
All right, so let's start off by getting your reaction to the medium-term budget policy statement.
We welcome it. Most of the expectations articulated by business have been accommodated. Of course, there are still some concerns, but I think we need to understand that, South Africa has always been helped by global events. So in this context of the medium-term budget policy statement, it is a bleak time for the global economy, where the whole world is undergoing a tectonic quake, where there is huge regime shift, there's worldwide slowdown, and there is indeed a troubled neighborhood we are all in, with multiple crises, not just one. As the world moves away from financial stability, predictable financial markets, low interest rates, but also low inflation, to a new world that is characterized more by exogenous shocks, and it is indeed less certain and less predictable. It is increased volatility that is precipitated by the intersection of three things. This notion of an unjustified, unprovoked, therefore unwarranted invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but also the pandemic, which is still with us. And then lastly, of course, the climate change. This has now created an energy crisis in Europe, driven mostly by increasing prices in energy, but also food prices. Now, also, South Africa is not immune in all of that. The evidence to us, as it is the rest of the world, is that we're seeing now a global recession, supply chain constraints, labor shortages, both fuel and food price inflation, but also double-digit increases. The interest rates have now really shot the lights out. GDP growth for the world is between 1.1 to 2.7% GDP growth I'm talking about. In South Africa, when it revives down to 1.9, it is if we do everything right, then we know that we are really bad at execution. Therefore, it's going to be less than that. But also increasing borrowing costs for governments and also businesses, where we are expecting a fifth wave of public debt crisis and increasing global commodity prices, but also reduced incomes that are now eroding both the household discretionary purchasing power, but also creating a cost of living crisis where there's going to be social tensions, where 123 million people just in sub-Saharan Africa are experiencing acute food insecurity. And the world has responded probably in three ways. One, there is an urgent need for fiscal coordination by many countries, not just one, but also the Americas and Europe are now reviewing their own economic policy. This notion of a just energy transition, amongst others, is being seen as the best chance to return to growth in the long term. Joanne, my dear sister?
Yeah, all right, Bonang, thanks for that, because I think giving us a full-on overview of that. But let's break it down a little bit and let's go into some of the announcements that were made, Eskom being one of them, and government announcing that they are going to be taking on a lot of the debt from Eskom. Obviously, it's not, in years gone by, we used to see government coming in and bailing out SOEs all of the time. But this wasn't as dramatic as usual, but Eskom definitely taking a major crunch of that. Your views on this? I mean, Eskom saying that they will take on about 132 to 260 billion rand of that 400 billion rand debt. I mean, is this again throwing into a dark pit, or do you think things may improve?
You see, my dear sister, the issue with South Africa is that we have 1,001 challenges, often with competing priorities. So the issue of Eskom debt being taken by government was a no-brainer, because government can better service Eskom debt cheaper than Eskom would ever do. By so doing, it then frees up Eskom to be able to take on more debt, one, to increase generation capacity, so that they are then able to address the issues of load shedding and to do it fast. Remember that of the 28 years of democracy, more than half of that we have spent in the dark with these blackouts that started in February of 2008. It is an indictment on all of us that 14 and a half years later, we are still struggling. In fact, it is worsening. The impact to the economy at stage 6 load shedding goes up to 4 billion rands a day, every day. Between stages, we are talking about 500 million. We wipe off an entire percentage point from the GDP growth in a year. But I think it also increases our borrowing cost as government, because now we have exceeded our borrowing capacity, where we were borrowing at a rate of 2.1 billion a day, every day. The cost of servicing this debt alone, the minister tells us, is now approaching 350 billion a year. That's 1 billion a day, every day. And it is unaffordable, because the debt to GDP ratio is 95%. But this excludes government guarantees to the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies. When you include that, it goes to 110%. It's not the percentage in and of itself. It's the fact that actually for us it's unaffordable. We now have to reprioritize expenditure from one government to the other. We are helped again by over-collections. Instead of being driven by mining because of increasing commodity prices, it's now driven by financial services and manufacturing, which is good. And the issue of addressing the e-tolls, I think, has been absolutely long overdue. Yeah. We were promised this in April of 2 years ago, rather late than never. But of course, lastly, is the capacity of the state, and in particular, the NPA capacity in response to the Zondo Commission and the investigative directorate is the one that really generally emboldens and energizes us as business.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, so those are quite optimistic points that we are putting through. I mean, because the e-toll saga has been hanging over our head. I think we've gotten a lot of responses from that. I mean, for the Gauteng provincial government now, they're the ones that have to decide how it goes. But, I mean, just paying that off would probably be the best way. Because right now, if this is one case that can be proven, that if civil society and if society stand together, you can achieve anything, because it does seem like the goal has now finally been achieved. E-tolls are off the cards. I mean, if we're reading through this, that's kind of what it is.
You see, the issue of social activism must be encouraged, because without an active citizenry, I think we are all in a spot of bother. It started with the treatment action campaign that forced this government to take the issue of antiretrovirals much more seriously. We continue to agitate and orchestrate as business for pro-business and pro-labor policies, because without both an outsized and oversized job impact, I think we are asking for another 2 weeks in July. Yeah. We were actually encouraged by the fact that most of the business expectations really have been accommodated. We wanted to continue fighting state capture and corruption. We wanted this notion of a stable, reliable, and predictable energy supply. We asked for provision of clean and affordable water. We wanted law and order, safety and security, because without it, who are we? We wanted to accelerate land reform. Here I'm talking about land restitution, land redistribution, but in particular addressing the issues of land tenure, because that's what people died for. We went to war for land as the as the primary means of production, when energy is the fourth means of production. We wanted to create a capable state, and then lastly, of course, we wanted to ensure this notion of a just energy transition. Nobody said switch off the 10 towns in the coal belt in Mpumalanga. It says you need to start thinking about it now. Because as I end, China thinks about its 1.4 billion citizens. That informs government policy. Then they incorporate it into its foreign policy. By the time it comes to Africa, what they're accommodating is creating jobs and a continuously growing economy for their own people, because if it doesn't, we might just have another Chinese revolution. So China is thinking about Africa as a strategy. Unfortunately, Africa is not thinking about its own strategy for itself, let alone having a plan for how it engages, interacts, and interfaces with other countries. I think that's where you need to contextualize the medium-term budget policy statement as a precursor to a State of the Nation address by the president, having been driven and finds expression in the budget statement. All of those things need to be aligned. Yeah. They don't have to be disparate, but they need to drive us into the next 50 years, not this cycle of 5 years where people are thinking about political office, but not about service delivery. To end, imagine if we provided service delivery as quickly as we change locks when we have a new mayor in Gauteng.
Paying reference to the Johannesburg mayor who went back and saw that the locks were changed on her office when she went to open the door and go back and assume the position. So that's where you're referring to. I want to just very quickly ask you about, it's just so much to talk about, Bonang, and with you I could speak the whole morning, but I want to talk about the supposedly temporary COVID relief fund, which has now been extended. So that is 30 billion rand. It has been extended. I mean, do you think government should just sort of say, you know what, this is now going to be a feature that is going to stay forever, instead of just keep on extending the COVID relief fund?
Absolutely, especially because it will be more difficult to take it away in a year where the ANC in December is going to its own elective conference. Because state resources are being used for party political gains. I mean, let's not move away from it. And it's going to be even more difficult because next year, the ANC and the country will be preparing for the 2024 national elections. So in these 2 years, we might as well cast in concrete this social relief of distress grants, because we have now become a country of grant recipients. It is just a fact. But also, how do we reduce the public sector wage bill in a year when the public sector is threatening to go on strike, and we can't afford another strike after the Transnet strike? So the minister has not included that in the budget, and we know it's going to be accommodated. They are not going to settle at anything less than 3 percentage points. But also the notion of reducing government debt itself is going to be much more challenged, and even include reducing the entire public sector wage bill, because we have too many jobs in wrong areas where we need them: doctors, nurses, police women and men. There we have huge vacancies. So we're not managing this in a strategic, in a much more structured, chronological, methodical way with an approach. And I think until and unless we put South Africa first, not the ANC first, because every president of the country swears allegiance to the Constitution and its supremacy, and swears to protect, respect, and uphold the Constitution, not to look after the best interest of the political party.
Bonang, before I let you go, this is kind of a one-word answer, and I'm hoping it's a one-word answer. I'm reading a commentary by Alec Hogg, who is saying, just to quote what he's saying, for the first time in many years, South Africa appears to be heading in the right direction, unquote. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Totally agree, directionally in the right way.
Boom. I'm leaving it on a positive note. Never get to do that these days in interviews. Prof, what a pleasure. Thanks again for speaking to us here on the program. That's Professor Bonang Mohale speaking to us from his capacity as president of BUSA, the Business Unity of South Africa, but also just giving us an analysis of the budget, what was announced yesterday, that midterm budget, and a little bit of cautious optimism coming through, I must say, from a lot of the commentary that came through. But the minister is going to be Sakina's guest in the next hour.